For a long time it seemed that certain Ferrari models were immune to market corrections. Yes, I'm talking about the 458. More recently though, prices have been decreasing in a certain part of the Ferrari market, while prices were stable or even continued to increase in another part. I'm talking about the split between the old and the new cars. Now I showed you before that Ferrari prices are quite strong, and that statement still holds, especially when you compare it to other cars. But when we zoom into the Ferrari market, we can see that the price dynamics changed. Newer mid-engine models such as the 458, 488 and F8 topped mid-2022 and prices have been decreasing ever since. Not plummeting, but decreasing. Compared to last year, price risk increased drastically in these markets, and if you are looking to purchase one of these cars, you should factor in the possibility that prices could continue to fall. If that's something that matters or not is of course up to you. Now the situation for older, mid-engine models such as the F355, 458 and F430 is completely different. Prices have been stable in those segments and in some cases even continue to increase. In this video we'll figure out how bad the situation is for the latest models, how good it is for the older models, and speculate about future prices. But as always, we'll first have a look at the current market. Over here is the US market in March. We can see that there are 631 cars listed for sale, and this is 8% less than 3 months ago. So the supply decrease is slightly smaller than in other markets. The same applies to the prices for that matter. In the grand scheme of things, they're relatively stable. Now looking at the prices, we can see the familiar patterns. 360s are by far the cheapest. High mileage cars start at $75,000. F355s are slightly more expensive and are now in the same price range as the F430. The gap between the F430 and the 458 is still significant, while the price difference between the 458 and 488 is still decreasing. Look at that, 458s that are newer than 2013 are priced at the same level as the oldest 488s. F8s are an enormous step up, and SF90s are probably out of reach for most of us. Ironically though, they have the highest depreciation rates. But as I mentioned in the introduction, also other mid-engine models are depreciating, and to be more precise, the ones coming after the 458s. It's no longer self-evident that these cars are going up in price. A purchase is therefore more risky than a year ago. Let's have a look at the models that are depreciating. Over here we have the price trend for the 458 Spiders and Coupes. We can see that prices decreased by 3.9% or $9,000 in the coupe market and by 2.7% or $7,400 in the Spider market. These decreases are approximately in line with what we could expect. Prices have been decreasing since June 2022, but as you can see, there's absolutely no reason to panic, and I think it's unlikely that the price decrease will accelerate. If we look at the most recent change, we can see that the decrease rate decreased in the Spider market. Furthermore, the confidence intervals in the coupe market have been relatively stable, and both developments are in line with the market trend. We're seeing weak convex price trends as we are approaching the summer. Compared to 3 years ago, values are then also up by 26% for the coupes and by 31.3% for the Spiders. Now what's interesting here is that this price pattern is almost identical to the one in the 488 market. We can see that also in this market, prices topped in June 2022 and have been decreasing ever since. In the last 3 months, prices decreased by approximately 4% in both markets. This equals $40,500 in the Spider market and $11,000 in the coupe market. Also these drops are in line with the market trend. Now compared to the 458 market that we saw previously, the price trend is slightly weaker. There's no sign of recovery in this market. Price trends are decreasing linearly. So if you buy a 488, I think you should expect a continuation of this trend, at least in the foreseeable future. After all, today's prices are an important predictor for prices 3 months into the future. Now compared to the market top, we are looking at drops of 7% in the coupe market and 10% in the Spider market. The long-term increase is also lower than in the 458 market. Spiders are up by only 10% and coupes by 15%. And remember that this was approximately 30% in the 458 market. The situation is similar in the F8 market. We can see that prices have been trending down since the summer of 2022. Compared to the market top, prices are down by 6 and 12%. The coupe market appears to be slightly stronger, but the market composition changed slightly, so I think that the trend for the Spider is slightly more reliable. Also compared to last year, prices are down, so short-term owners are looking at a loss of 6 to 9%. It is then also no surprise that supply is up, and that is a rarity these days. Now the leader or loser, depending on the way you look at it, is the SF90. Depreciation rates in that market are high. It probably ranks among the fastest depreciating cars that feature on the channel. Look at that. Prices have been decreasing since its introduction. Compared to 3 months ago, prices dropped again 6% or $50,000, and this has basically been the story in every market update. Compared to last year, values are down by 19% or $170,000, and looking at this trend, it's clear that there are no signs of recovery. However, supply stabilized for the first time in the SF90 market. There are currently 83 cars listed for sale, and this is the same as in January. So maybe the worst is over. But as always, at this level in the market, we need to be a bit careful with the prices. There could be large differences between the advertised and selling prices. This trend though is confirmed by anecdotal evidence. So we saw now that price trends for the 488, 488, F8 and SF90 are pointing down. So if you purchase any of these cars, you should factor in the possibility that prices could continue to decrease. Between 2 and 4% per 3 months seems to be the current rate, and there are of course no guarantees that these will be the future rates. They could be higher or lower. But out of these markets, I think that the 458 has the strongest price trends. The most recent developments are slightly convex, and prices are still way up compared to 3 years ago. But all of this of course doesn't change the fact that value risk appears to be much lower for the older cars. Have a look at the following price trends. Over here we have the trend for the F355, and we can see that the short-term trend is approximately flat and that the long-term trend is up. Prices are up by 35% or $35,000 compared to the end of 2021. The trend stabilized in 2022 and prices have been fluctuating between $130,000 and $140,000. You can see that the confidence intervals are really large, and this is caused by low supply in combination with a large price variability. Targas are a lot more expensive than the Spiders. This trend does then also represent the average development in the market. But also when we look at the Spiders on a standalone basis, we can see that the price trend is strong. Yes, it's a bit more volatile due to the market size, but we cannot see the topping patterns that are present in the markets for the more recent mid-engine models. In fact, price trends show more similarities to the ones in the 360 market. Also over there, price trends are strong. Over here we have the price trends for the automatics, and we can see that prices increased by 4.3% during the most recent months and have been relatively stable since the end of 2021. Prices fluctuated around $100,000. Long-term owners are looking at a nice 30% or $25,000 increase. Now what's fascinating about this trend is that it looks completely different than all the other trends that I shared on my channel. The majority are characterized by a topping pattern in the summer of 2022, but none of that applies to the 360 market. These cars are then also becoming increasingly rare. There are currently only 23 cars listed for sale, while this was 63 at the end of 2021. It's interesting how the price distribution shifted over time. It used to be quite concentrated around the mean, but in today's market the right tail is much fatter, indicating that low mileage examples in pristine condition demand significant premiums. Manuals are of course a lot more expensive, but the price trend is very similar, albeit a bit more volatile due to the smaller market size. Now moving on to the F430, we can see that the price trend is very similar to the one in the 360 market. Look at that. Over here we have the price trends for the automatics, and we can see that prices have been fairly stable at $145,000 to $155,000. The market bottom has been extremely stable and the market top increased slightly. Compared to February 2020, prices are up by 33% or $37,000. That's almost identical to the 360 market. After all of those graphs, I think it's time that we wrap up and conclude. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that there are two types of price trends in the Ferrari market. Trends for the F355, 360 and F430 have been stable or even increasing, while price trends for the 458, 488 and F8 topped and started to decrease. In other words, the older cars are holding up much better than the newer cars, and the newer the car, the weaker the price trend. Is this a unique, mind-blowing finding? No, of course not. New cars are more susceptible to depreciation, something that has made a comeback after being absent for more than 2 years. Price dynamics in the current market are not comparable to the market during the pandemic. Therefore, if you buy one of the new mid-engine models, you should factor in a probability that values might continue to drop. I'm not attaching a value label to this, only you can decide whether or not this is something that matters to you. In general though, I want to stress that the price decreases are still relatively small when you compare them with some other cars. Now when it comes to future prices, nobody knows for certain what will happen, and I tend to refrain from making bold statements about these future price developments. I rather like to think about them in terms of scenarios with probabilities attached to them. And given that the current trend is an important predictor for future prices, I think it makes sense to expect a continuation of the current developments. That is, a decrease for the newer models and a stable development for the older ones. It of course doesn't mean that all of this will materialize. We saw, for example, weak indications in the 458 market that the price trend could flatten a bit, and also the plateauing of supply levels in the SF90 market could indicate a future flattening. Moreover, prices strengthened slightly across the board, so it would not be unusual to see this in the Ferrari market as well. But all of this is of course speculation, and you should treat it as such. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would like to see an analysis for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you will find market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the car for which you would like to see a market analysis by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.